Well, thank you, Paul, for that great introduction, and thanks also for the opportunity to participate in another Dentist Boost, and especially thanks, Paul, for those great opening acts. I mean, Mark Costas, Summer Casmel, Jason Tenori. I mean, it doesn't get any better than that. I mean, those people are going places, I'm sure, especially the Costas guy. So, it's a tough act to follow in all seriousness, but I always enjoy being at these events, and the community that Paul has built is awesome. So yes, my topic is mistakes dentists make with multiple practice ownership, which Paul assigned to me, more or less, which I was happy with this assignment because over the years, and I've known Paul for longer than I really can remember. I think now I just say 15 or so plus years, but I have to go back and look at calendars and think about life to figure out how long it's actually been. But over the years, sometimes I get instructions to give a presentation about how not to burn your nachos, looking out for bad guac, and I say, okay, Paul, I can do that. Give me a little more info as to what you're really looking for here. But so this was an easy one, mistakes dentists make with multiple practice ownership. And since we are doing a shorter version here, oftentimes I like to do top 10s, but in my 25 minutes, I think I'm going to cover a top 6. Not necessarily in order, but these are sort of as they came to me when I was preparing for this. So, the first, buying for the sake of buying. So what we see a lot of times are entrepreneurial dentists that are growing their practices that are just fixated on quick growth, rapid growth. What's available? I want to buy it. You know, they have good relationships with people in the industry, with brokers, with supply reps, and the people that can bring them deals. And they'll seemingly do any deal that are brought to them. And this can actually come back to haunt them, not surprisingly. I mean, after all, as anybody that owns a multiple group practice knows that your ultimate exit strategy, the group that's going to buy your practice at some point in the future, is probably going to be a DSO. And unlike in the sort of historically warped dentist-to-dentist valuation pricing structure of a percentage of revenue, DSOs generally want to pay a multiple of profit, right? So buying practices just for the sake of growth or growing revenue is not a great strategy. And we do see where this is a mistake that multiple practice owners sometimes make. And, you know, may sound counterintuitive, but bad deals can actually bring down the value of your organization. So if you're looking at what is your EBITDA, you know, what is the profit of the practice essentially, which when you go to sell to a group is going to be a multiple of that EBITDA. If you look at your EBITDA and you do a bad deal, even though you may have purchased a practice that's doing $1.5 million of revenue, that could possibly bring down the EBITDA of the overall organization. And from time to time, and seemingly like a little more frequently in recent times, what we've seen are sometimes DSOs will just walk away from practices that are not profitable. And people will say, wow, they paid $1.5 million for that practice 2 years ago, and now they just handed the keys back to the landlord? That's crazy. How can they do that? It's bad business. No, it's actually good business. They're making the right decision at that time to extract themselves from what was a bad deal that's bringing down the value of the practice. But then note too that as you grow, you need to have a strategy for that growth. And that's going to be another thing that we'll talk about in a few minutes. But just assembling things and growing for the sake of growing, making your organization bigger isn't necessarily making it better, isn't necessarily making it more valuable, and it's not necessarily making you more sane. So, big mistake that we often see. The next thing is a lack of a plan for financing. And this is a tricky one. Admittedly, the biggest challenge that I see for practice owners that are looking to grow is where are they going to get the money to do that? You know, just about anybody can go off and do a de novo. Anybody can buy a practice, especially after you've done it a few times. You've got your team together, you know how to do it, you have your systems to do that, but you need the money to be able to do that. And so it's important to have a strategy for where are you going to get that money to be able to continue to grow and to grow efficiently. There are people, consultants especially, that can guide you with that process and help bring you and introduce you to people that would be able to back you and help you. So it's kind of like sometimes we kind of joke, but not really joke, where we have situations where people are trying to buy something that they don't have the money for, and I've joked with one of my buddies in the industry about it's like this guy's shopping for a Lamborghini and he doesn't have any money in his bank account, right? So you need to know where you're getting the money from, have that strategy, have it in place, and don't try to figure it out as you go along. I mean, very rarely in anything that you're doing with your practice, if your strategy or your plan is to figure it out along the way, that's not really a strategy and that's not really a plan. Okay, no strategy for associate retention. So, this is a really interesting one, and it's something that we all have to deal with. Any kind of retention of employees, and especially professional employees. These are the people that are generating revenue in the practice. These are the people that are ultimately, they are the professionals that the patients are coming to see. So how do you retain them? And where we see a lot of times where there's a lot of turnover with smaller groups, where they say, well, how can these dentists keep leaving us? We keep having new dentists turn over. It seems like every few months we have to hire somebody new. It's inefficient. It's not helping us grow. It's right, because you need to have a plan with that too. Now, I don't think there's anybody that's a DSO in the room here, certainly not as an attendee, but you need to take a cue from those groups. What are they doing to retain their associates? Whether it's profit sharing or minority buy-ins, equity buy-ins to the practice where that person's working. If anybody listens to podcasts that I do with Paul and other times when I'm speaking, you'll know that I'm a really, I get on the soapbox about how negative those relationships can be, because oftentimes we're on the associate buyer side of those, and they can be very predatory. They don't need to be, though. You can do this in a way that's fair and equitable for your associate to help give them some ownership and some skin in the game where they want to stay. And ultimately, as Paul likes to say, and I will steal this from him, these dental practices are people businesses. And it's important to have good people. It sounds obvious, but as the previous people were talking about, this is part of the plan and the strategy, and you need to do it. And it was funny in a sort of not so funny way. Years ago, I had a client that came in and they had this great plan that they were going to do 3 de novo practices each year. They had a ton of money behind them, so that wasn't an issue. They had some people that had some decent experience, but probably not the right experience for growing that enterprise. And they said, we're going to do 3 a year for the next 4 years, and then we're going to expand beyond that, and then we're going to sell it. And I said, okay, great, just of course the conversation, because none of them were dentists, of course, who are going to be the dentists? And they looked at me like I was crazy. They're like, we're just going to hire dentists. Any dentist? Yeah, we're just going to hire dentists. Okay. And then we had to have a conversation about the fact that all dentists are not alike, all dentists are not created equally, and that, if you're just thinking you're going to plug in, whatever, 30 people that are going to produce $800,000 or $1 million a year in production, that's not that easy. And, let's fast forward probably about 3 years after that meeting, maybe 4, they were selling off all their practices, one by one, and got out of the dental business and got into some other marketing business that was probably better suited for them. But, they, to their credit, anytime that I would open a Google browser, they would have an ad there for their practices. So they were good at that, and good at marketing and good at getting their name out there. They just weren't good at the dental part of it, kind of a minor inconvenience. Next thing, bad leases. So we do a lot of lease reviews and negotiations for startup dentists. We obviously deal with lease issues as part of the transition process. When we tell people, when we're helping them, when they're signing the lease, which is the time to get the lease right, that the number one deal killer in a practice transition is an uncooperative landlord. So when a lot of times we'll inherit group practices, multiple practice owners, after they've already bought a few practices, kicked around the dental legal world and found their way to us, and we'll look at their leases and see that they have language in there that says that they can't assign the lease without the landlord's consent. And sometimes it'll say, which shall not be unreasonably withheld. Well, what is unreasonable is sort of, beauty in the eye of the beholder. So what Rob Montgomery thinks is unreasonable, what Joe McGonigal thinks is unreasonable, what Paul Goodman thinks is unreasonable, what the landlord thinks is unreasonable, and what the judge thinks is unreasonable can likely be very different things. So you don't, especially when you have a group of practices and you're looking at possibly selling them for a lot of money, and it would be at the same time, you don't want to find out that you've got one landlord who's a holdout who's not allowing you to assign that lease to the group or the purchaser of your practice. How to remedy that? All of these leases should have language in there that allow you to transfer the lease, to assign the lease to a purchaser of the practice without the landlord's consent. And that's really the gold standard. That's the language that you want to get. When do you want to get it? Ideally, when you're negotiating the lease initially. But if you're inheriting somebody else's lease, when you buy a practice, you may not have that luxury. So when it comes time to renew a lease or extend a lease, that's when you have a seat at the table and the ability and the leverage to negotiate with the landlord to kind of correct the sins of those who came before you on this thing and make sure that you're setting yourself up for success. Next mistake, improper staffing and management. One of my first, I guess it was my second big group practice that I represented back starting in the late 90s, was somebody that I helped to grow from 2 practices to 13 locations. We did about 20 deals for them because they were doing some fold-ins over about a 5 or so year period. And that was really my first taste of dealing with a great entrepreneurial dentist. And what made him so great was that he realized that he needed a team around him. He still was a chairside dentist, but he didn't try to be a chairside dentist who owned 13 practices, because you can't do both of those things. And that's, sort of the hidden curse of owning a professional practice, whether you're a dentist, a lawyer, a CPA, an architect, is that you're trying to practice the profession while you're trying to run a business. And you can't do both of those things well all the time, certainly by yourself. You need help. And while there's also always a lot of discussion about getting dentists to help, you're going to hire associates to grow, hire associates to hopefully change what your involvement is in the organization. That was funny to hear earlier that, and I hear this a lot from clients, I want to hire an associate because I want to work less and make more, ha, 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 or I'm going to hire more people to so that I have less responsibility and I can take more time off, ha, ha, ha. When you make your office and your business bigger, you are foolish to think that it's going to get easier. What's it's like the rap song, mo money, mo problems, right? Mo people, mo problems, I will say. So, you need to be realistic with this. But one of the great things that my, early on entrepreneurial dentist did was he brought on business people. those whatever 20 or so transactions that we did, he was barely involved in any of them. He was the guy that ultimately said yay or nay. You had to run it past him, but he wasn't running these deals. Every day we were working on these transactions. I'm talking to his business guy. He's not a dentist. He had a great background in the dental business world. He was a huge asset, but he was the business person. And so my client ultimately knew that he was a good clinical guy. He still practiced clinical dentistry for a long time into that acquisition run, but he certainly was very involved in overseeing and managing the clinical aspects of the practice. But he did bring in a business person. And so as you continue to grow and you look to grow, you need to have a strategy for who are the people going to be that are going to be your staff and help manage you. And as sort of with the previous speakers, is sort of to sow the ground here with this, this shouldn't come as a surprise, but the strategy when you're growing and staffing and managing your practices should not be that I'm going to work more and harder, right? Like if you think that you're going to go from 2 practices to 4 practices and you're still going to be a dentist and you're still going to be ultimately the person that's managing all these decisions, that is not a tenable strategy, okay? That will run you into the ground, it will burn you out, and it is probably the quickest way to fail. So you have to think about replacing yourself, not just as a dentist, but as a business person. And some of that might be through employees, some of that might be through consultants, some of that might be through fractional people like CFOs and other people that are more involved. But again, don't think that you're just going to grow by working more, because that will get you to a very bad place. And the last thing I would say that multiple practice owners make, and this topic is something that I could literally talk about for an hour, are bad sales. What does the exit strategy look like? And we do see a lot of people that don't do this right. And I'm not going to judge them for that, because a lot of times this system and the practice transition world for large practices is kind of rigged against the dentist. Realize that when you have multiple practices, you probably have one type of buyer for your group, and that's a DSO. Now, while you have acquired practices as a dentist-to-dentist, more or less transaction to grow your portfolio, that is a dental practice deal, a buyer and a seller, when it comes time to sell a group of practices to a DSO, while it is a sale of a dental practice, that's where the similarities end. And mistakes that we see are where people are not working with the right groups, the right consultants to help, and the right brokers to help guide them through the process. They're CPAs, they're lawyers. You can't treat these deals just like it's a sale of a practice to a dentist. These are people that are buying these practices. They're experienced, they're very sophisticated, they have very sophisticated counsel, and they have structured these deals in a way that is way more complex than the other 8 practices that you've done asset purchases for. And so when you're talking about rolling over equity and holdbacks and what your rights are with that equity and your employment agreements, you have to be so careful. And with that, unlike in a dentist-to-dentist deal, which is usually a very amicable transaction where we've got everybody's cooperating, it's called a practice transition. You've got a seller who wants to transition their legacy to a buyer. They want to help and see them succeed. These deals are really set up for the buyer to win the transaction. And you're talking about oftentimes where they're going to show up with multiple lawyers, maybe 5 or 6 lawyers that are representing them. And the game is to put things in there that are to their client's advantage. And it's on you and your team to find that. Some of that is financial, with what are these numbers and how are they determining those. Some of it's legal. making sure that you find the ahas so that you don't find out a year later what you agreed to when the DSO comes and takes back $3 million of your equity because there was a breach of a representation that you didn't even realize was in there. So it's important to understand the differences. And you need a team of people, literally a team, to be able to go up against that other team. You know, you would never think about playing basketball 5-on-2 unless those two are, you know, NBA players. So same thing. If you've got a DSO that's got a team of lawyers, a team of financial people, a team of management people, you need to counter that with your own team. Otherwise, you're going to lose. And the other thing that is important, and this is along these lines of bad sales usually start off somewhat in the same way, which is the dreaded unsolicited offer, where a memo comes in, an LOI, you weren't really in the market, you haven't engaged a broker to help you, and suddenly a DSO has showed interest in you. Wow, that's cool. You know, like everybody likes to be wanted and feel like what they have is important and valuable. And so it becomes this sort of like intoxicating trap, right? And I say trap because it's not an accident. You know, this is a business strategy to acquire these practices. So when you get an unsolicited offer, you need to have your antenna up and you have to get your people on this to help you with that. And rarely is an unsolicited offer the best offer that you're going to get. You know, if you're working with a good broker who's going to take your portfolio of practices, your organization to market, they're going to put it out where there might be 10, 15 or more people, or groups rather, that they're marketing this to, you're going to see what is the best deal that you're going to get. And the best deal is not always the best number, you know, so you might see a situation where it's like, we value your practice at $15 million. That's the top line of the LOI, right? Wow, that's great. And they hope that you don't continue to read, you know, because it's like, wow, $15 million. I won the lottery. Like, how could $15 million, how could that not be a good deal for me? Well, again, we could talk for the next hour. We could bring Joe McGonigal up here with me and show you all the ways that $15 million may turn out to be a really bad deal. But this is where you need to get your financial people involved. You need somebody to help you break down, what does this really mean to you? You know, how much money are you foregoing? What is the delta between being an owner and an associate that's going to work after you sell? After you look at what is this equity really worth? What are your rights to sell it? Does this company have a track record? And, you know, big surprise, you know, spoiler alert, the biggest number is not always the best deal. So there's other aspects about you having to continue to work in this practice and whether it's really a good fit for what you want. You know, and as like Mark was talking about earlier, just chasing the top dollar when it comes to this stuff usually is not a recipe for success. But, you know, I can't overemphasize the importance of understanding the economics and the cash flows of these deals before you do them. You don't want to find out 6 months later what this deal meant to you economically because you didn't do the homework with the right people before. And I tell our clients all the time that we as lawyers could do the greatest bit of legal work ever, but there's nothing that we can do as lawyers that can make a bad deal good. And what is a bad deal? It's a bad deal because the economics and the structure weren't right or weren't the right deal for our particular client. And so I want to thank everybody for your time. And best way to get in touch with us, thank you. YourDentalLawyer.com. We have a form there. You can submit questions.
Is that on the next slide, your thing? Because it's not there.
Sorry, yeah.
Perfect, yeah, leave that there.
Yeah, there you go.
Yes.
YourDentalLawyer.com, and my email address is up on the website, of course. It's rob@rmontgomery-law.com. Thanks, everybody.